the response in the body is very much the same, but your interpretation of those feelings is going to make a very big difference. It's going to be, oh, I feel this nervous excitement. I can't wait to get on stage. I'm so excited to sing to my audience. They are really excited to be here. Maybe that type of self talk versus, oh, I feel terrible. That must mean something is wrong. This is going to be a disaster, and they're all going to shout boo at me. Right. So this just depends on how my brain decides to speak about my physical and emotional experience and how it decides to interpret it.
Hello and welcome to And If Love Remains. Today is, we're recording this a little bit early, but we're going to be publishing this on January 1st, New Year's Day, a perfect day to talk a little bit about our subject today. And I'm excited to have with us Dr. Elias Axel Pedersen, Mr. Piano Maestro. I think I might call you the director or our resident director of music of And If Love Remains, Elias. And we also have a special guest. We also have a special guest today, Ingela Onstad. And I am thrilled to have her on. I couldn't be more pleased. It was actually Elias who turned me on to some of the things that she's talking about. She is a singer with a great repertoire in operatic singing. She's also a therapist, a licensed therapist, and she has focused in on performance anxiety. She has a website, courageousartistry.com, and would like very much to welcome Ingela to the show. Welcome.
Yes, thank you. Thank you both for having me.
It's my pleasure, and I'd really love to hear your story a little bit. Let's talk first a little bit about your as a singer. Talk about did you always sing, and kind of some of your career highlights, some of the things that you've done, and some and maybe talk about some of the struggles you had with performance anxiety, or just tell us a little bit about your story.
Sure. So I think like a lot of musicians out there, when I was growing up, the only thing I wanted to do was be a musician. And I played piano and oboe, and then I got into singing lessons, and that was really just it for me. I just thought I want to become an opera singer. Now, when I was young, I didn't know what that meant, what that took, what I had to do. But, when you're young, you kind of don't know any better. And so I pursued classical singing and, had a bit of aptitude for it. But I don't like to use the T word talent because I think it's overused and people tend to just treat you as if you were born with all of these gifts and you don't have to work at them. And I think that that's oftentimes really sort of a slap in the face to us musicians out there, right? That to say that we didn't have to work very hard at what we do in order to be good at it. Yes, exactly. So I had maybe a little bit of natural aptitude. And then I devoted myself to the study of singing, and I got a Bachelor of Music degree at McGill University in Montreal. And then after that, shortly thereafter, I moved to Germany. And I lived in Germany for about a decade. And when I first moved there, I was there with my then boyfriend, who then became my husband. And he's German. And so we were there sort of on his turf, and he was working and I was looking for jobs, and I nannied, and I worked retail, and I was learning German at the time, and we got married. And then eventually I got some jobs working in opera houses and operetta. I did some professional chorus, and then I did some solo roles in different places. And I really thought that that was going to be the rest of my life, that I was going to stay in Germany and just dedicate myself to opera there. That was always my dream. And then, as life does, it took some turns and twists, some unexpected things. And anyway, I ended up moving back to the United States in 2012 it was, so 8 years ago. And at the time when I left Germany, I knew that I would be giving up my sort of operatic career as I had planned it for my whole career. I thought, when I moved back to the United States, it's a whole different industry here, you're really a freelancer. In Germany, you're working and living in a certain city, and you have a contract for a few years at a time, which is a very, humane way of running things. But back here, you're definitely a freelancer and living out of a suitcase much of the time. And I knew that that wasn't really the life for me anymore. So I decided to get a master's degree in voice because I thought I might want to go the academic route. And I'm glad that I did that. I ended up not choosing academia. But what I decided during that time was I was thinking of other things I had been interested in my life, and I've always been the person that everybody came to talk with when they had issues going on in their lives. Always kind of the
Right.
shoulder that people would lean on in that way. I think there's one or two of those in every group of people, and so thinking about doing something psychology related just felt like a natural fit. And I ended up getting a Master of Arts degree in counseling, and now I'm a licensed mental health counselor here in the state of New Mexico, also sometimes referred to as therapist or psychotherapist, just depending on where you live and what you're familiar with. And at the time, or all of this time in these past 8 years that I've been back in the States, I've still been performing a lot, mainly locally and regionally, and then pursuing my therapy practice on the side. I taught voice privately for a decade, so I was kind of wearing all of these hats. And then one day it dawned on me that why couldn't I kind of figure out a way to help performers, musicians and other performers with their mental health, because I know that all of that was so lacking in my life. So I ended up launching this business, Courageous Artistry, where I specialize in doing coaching work. It's a little bit different than the therapy work I do, because in coaching I can do it with anybody all over anywhere in the world, which is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in therapy, you're really relegated to working within the state where you're licensed. So coaching becomes kind of a happy medium so that I can reach more people, not do specific therapy work with them, but still work on mental and emotional wellness related things. But
Right.
kind of circling back to what you had asked, Mike, about my own performance anxiety and my own experience there. I don't know if the two of you will relate to this, but many people I speak with, I think, can relate strongly to this. I don't even know if I had labeled it at the time that I was having performance anxiety. I think for me, this sort of overall anxiety that I felt in my career on stage or in rehearsals or going to auditions was just part of the business. It was just part of being a performer. And it was so much just kind of like the wallpaper, it was just there. And
Right.
now, being older and having more perspective and a whole different degree and career in this, I can look back on my younger self and see how much um, my own self doubt and anxiety often held me back. It prevented me from maybe taking advantage of as many opportunities as I could have. Or I think the classic example in my life was um, kind of always feeling like, oh, well, I'm not ready to go do that thing yet. Or I'm not ready to show up here and sing for these people or
Mm.
audition for this program or go here because I still need to work on myself. So it showed up a lot in ways of just making me feel like I was kind of in the eternal preparation state and never really ready to take full action.
That's wonderful. That's an
Yeah.
interesting way to think of it, because I think a lot of people. I know I felt that way too. That you're never quite ready, and so you keep procrastinating the day. When the fact is, you're only ready when you say you're. I don't know the answer to
Yeah.
that, but that's an interesting take on that.
Right. Yeah. I think it's sort of I didn't have the classic stage fright where I was terrified to actually go on the stage. I mean, I always have a sort of normal and healthy amount of nervous system activation when I'm about to go into a rehearsal or a performance, but it was nothing ever debilitating. Um, but I think for me, it showed up more in ways of kind of planning out my career and thinking about steps I wanted to take and taking advantage of opportunities or not. So I always like to say that even though I have to kind of call it performance anxiety because that becomes a blanket term, when I work with performers, I'm really working on all of the types of self doubt or imposter syndrome or anxiety that show up in a lot of ways in our lives and affect our careers and sort of our identity as an artist in many different ways.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah.
And you talking about this, I think there's also another. And Elias, feel free to jump in. The thought that I have is, especially being a performer, you have all kinds of pressures and all kinds of different, I guess, anxieties, different things that are kind of compound on top of each other, getting ready for, and then the performance itself, and and all of those things. And I think being flexible, and I think that's one of the things as artists, especially in 2000 and 2020 terms, like that adds just another whole element of okay, am I going to perform? How is this going to performance? Do I do it on Zoom? I mean, there's so
Yeah.
many other aspects that all of a sudden it becomes even more anxiety ridden. I think it
Yeah.
has been for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, me too. Me too, for sure. I'm the only concerts I've been doing this year, and I'm preparing for one we're doing a recording next week. Have all been, either live streamed or pre-recorded. And I'm a live musician. I don't record things, generally speaking. So just getting used to the recording process, the fact that it's out there in the world for all to hear, for posterity, and we're putting things on social media. These are things that I'm working with a lot of clients right now, and just getting over their anxiety about putting their material out there into the world in a different form than they've ever done before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll just
Lee,
say, yeah, it's interesting with social media. I mean, I'm 40 and I grew up with. I remember when the internet started, and we got our first computer at home and things like that. And it's a lot different world right now for high schoolers. I also teach a lot of high school age students. I teach in high school as well, and the kinds of pressures that they have are, each generation is different, but they have so many more pressures, I feel, than we had to deal with. So the quantity is more. I don't know if the quality has changed, but it's just they really have to worry about that. And I've made recordings, and I know, and I've performed, and it's a very different kind of feeling that you get, a different kind of nervousness or anxiety, as you would say, performing versus recording. And yeah, it's like Mike said, 2020. It's really a time to reflect and see where we're at. So I think what you're talking about is very important these days.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you mentioned that. Yes, I'm also 40, and so I can recall exactly when social media started becoming a bigger part of my life, and it's then to even have to make the decision if we want to put things out there for the world to see in that way. Even that, just making that decision can be fraught with a lot of anxiety and nerves. And yeah, my heart really does go out to the younger generations who have had to deal with this in a very much more intense, much more frequent way than we ever had to, where it's almost like every day becomes a sort of performance of its own if you're posting something on social media.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
Oh, that's for sure. So this is Mike Levitt. We're with speaking with Ingela Onstad, also Elias Axel Pedersen. This is And If Love Remains, and Ingela has a website called Artist. I'm sorry,
Courageous Artistry.
courageousartistry.com. Thank you.
You're welcome.
There was my anxiety right there.
Yeah,
I'm
there
going
we
to forget everything. But very pleased to have her on, and it is interesting that we bring this up because there is some, I to paraphrase Neil Peart, who paraphrased Shakespeare, all the world's a stage and we are merely players, performers and portrayers. It's interesting. I think a lot of people are feeling more anxious because of social media. I think has definitely amplified it, but the internet in itself, the idea that things will be out there forever. If Elias, you perform a concert and maybe it didn't go quite perfectly. That's okay. People will come and congratulate you, and you can kind of move on, and okay, you can improve for the next performance. But you put it out there, it's there forever. And I think that's a whole other set of just whoa.
Yeah. That's a lot of kind of more existential fear, I think there. It's, in the moment, if I'm performing, okay, I might be judged in this moment, but then, like you said, when the performance ends and, I'm done talking to the audience and I go home, I can try my best to just assess what I would like to improve on for next time and what went well and what didn't go so well. And even if something didn't go very well, if in my estimation it went really poorly, it was just maybe 2 hours of my life. Right.
Right.
I can get over that. But yeah, if there's something being recorded live and then being streamed, most of the time, obviously with social media, unless you're doing some type of live on social media, you can make multiple takes, but then that's its own process of getting in your head and deciding that nothing's ever good enough. And yeah, 2020 has been interesting. I think it's really peaked that anxiety of how do I put myself out there, and also a lot of our existential anxieties about how do I make a living at my craft if I'm not able to do it in the regular ways that I was doing it before.
Hmm. I find that what you're talking about, and this goes to more of a systemic thing at our schools. You mentioned that you never learned this per se, or had classes. I think at least in most universities, music schools are set up, and we don't have the kind of training that many other fields have. I mean, I'll just compare to sports. You've got your coach, but you've also got the trainers, and you've got people, the medics, and everybody taking care of things to make sure you're really performing at your peak, and that's another performance. And in music school, I feel it's very disjointed. You've got your primary teacher who teaches you either how to sing or how to play piano or guitar or whatever, and you take your music theory and music history classes. There's not much talk about developing a career, whatever that means. There's not much talk about how to integrate all of these things, mental health. I've studied Alexander technique too. There's nothing
Mm.
about how we're really using our body. Maybe you have a conscientious teacher, but I think what you're discussing is more holistic and bringing all of that together. Do you see any way that our culture or society will change or go towards that, or start to make more use of those tools that we have?
I hope so, and really, you're totally speaking my language here, Lias, because I always, when I'm working with my private clients, I liken what we do to being an Olympian, where when you're performing at a very high level and you've devoted most of your life to your craft, you have similar pressures, and you have also this lifestyle surrounding it that not many quote unquote civilians, non-performers, I think, can understand. For example, I'm off of work right now in between the holidays. I'm not seeing any of my therapy or coaching clients, but I'm still practicing every day for an upcoming concert. So this is not time off for me. It's time that I have to spend doing something else if I want to still pursue my craft. But you're right. If we were athletes, we would have a whole team of people that would be helping us. And I think that and I can really only speak for classical music because that's the realm that I know best. However, I do have clients who work in Broadway or film or anything like that, and I don't think it's completely dissimilar that it's taboo to speak about your mental health. It's taboo to admit if you're struggling with something because I think we have this very binary view that either you're, once again, kind of going back to what I was saying at the beginning of our conversation, either you're born with this talent and you're never nervous and everything's great all the time, or you're just not good enough to make it in this field.
Yeah.
And because it is a highly competitive field, I think it becomes then a self-perpetuating cycle of don't talk about how you're really feeling or doing, because that might make people think that you are somehow, and once again, heavy air quotes here, less talented or less able. And it's very sad. And I think it's interesting that people are always um, I hear frequently from people, oh, I didn't know that there was anybody out there doing work like you do. Yet, once again, if we're talking about athletics, we would know of sports psychologists. That would have just been a part of our lives. So isn't it funny that in the realm of professional music or performing arts in general, that it becomes this strange taboo?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. There are the people that might need that attention for other reasons, and draw it upon themselves, and always be crying out how difficult things are. And there are certainly in the music world, those personalities
Mhm.
are pretty apparent, and maybe they're more frequent than in the general population. But you're right, with injury or with mental health, anything that's sort of wrong with us, it's either binary. You're perfect, or you have, oh man, you have issues. In the piano world, tendonitis is a big
Mhm.
thing. Well, you should be practicing more. You have tendonitis. Well, you must not be very good, or you must
Yeah.
have some issues. And it
Mhm.
only takes a couple major um, performers like Grafman or Fleischer that had vocal dystonia, and then people understand that, oh, this is actually an issue. It's not through necessarily their own wrongdoing,
Yeah.
and it's something really serious to deal with. So
Yeah. And isn't it sad that, there's such sort of shaming involved,
Oh
that there, you
yes.
must have done something wrong. And this is very much true in the vocal community as well, that if people have had to have any type of vocal surgery or rehabilitation, it becomes this incredibly taboo topic. And I think only recently are people starting to speak about it more openly and normalizing the fact that whether we're talking about our mental or emotional health or our physical health, things go wrong and it's nobody's fault.
Hmm.
You
I
didn't
think it's
necessarily do
harder.
anything wrong.
Yeah, I think it's particularly hard with voice, because that's so direct. It's like you are the instrument. So when you sing for somebody, there's such a judgment on you. When I
Yes.
play piano, if somebody doesn't like it, it's like, well, you didn't understand the music, or it was a bad piano. I have so many excuses
Mm.
I can point.
Yeah.
There is
A
that
singer
disconnection,
doesn't.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So thank you for mentioning that, because I often envy instrumentalists for that reason, that, oh, this old thing, I'll just throw that instrument in the corner and, I've got to walk around with mine every day. So it's very personal. And of course, the sound of the human voice is so distinctive, right? That only
mhm,
I only sound like myself and you only sound like yourself. So
mhm,
there's I think there are different types of anxieties and worries and nervousness that crop up amongst the different types of, I'll call them populations of musicians. um, and we all kind of have our special brand of things to deal with.
mhm. Yeah, I go ahead, Mike. I don't know if you have any
No,
thoughts or
go
questions.
ahead. I have things, but please continue.
I'm thinking, if we're just in the music realm, and I am curious about clients that you work with, either in therapy or in coaching, that are from other realms. Not necessarily music, but just in the music realm. You mentioned working with people from other genres. I don't know if you've worked with. I assume you have jazz musicians or pop musicians, and what might those musicians bring to the table, and are they different from classical musicians, just because maybe of the expectations in those genres?
That's an interesting question, and I will say that I tend to attract more of the classical crowd, because that's sort of where I have my own personal reach, and where my the largest slice of my community is. But I do have some people that I work with who either do straight acting or do musical theater type things, and I would say that when it comes down to it, the human emotions behind all of this, just the root feeling, one of our most base and basic emotions of fear of judgment, fear of not being good enough, fear of rejection is a huge one. And that one is really based very deeply in our own biology, because, you know, thinking back to Paleolithic times when we lived in smaller groups, families, smaller tribes, had we been rejected from our group, that could have meant certain death for us.
Yeah.
you know
Absolutely.
so we definitely all have a very, very deeply vested interest in other people's opinions, and keeping the esteem and respect of other people. And I like to bring that up because I like to normalize that we worry about this and that it's important to us, and that there's a reason why it's important to us, that we can't go around pretending that other people's opinions don't matter to us. Now, where it becomes problematic is when we start doing what we call mind reading and pretending as if we know what everybody else is thinking or feeling about us, and start projecting things onto them. And then we start making decisions in our lives or our careers or our art based on what we assume other people are thinking or not thinking about us. So I think when it comes down to it, regardless of the genre, we all just struggle with this desire to be liked and accepted, and then balancing that with how do that I also become my own unique artist with my own unique fingerprint, so that I'm bringing something different to the world.
Yeah. Wow.
That's yeah. I think that's wisdom there. That's big stuff. I I want to. I have a theory, and it's nothing but a theory. So feel free to. It's okay to trash my theories. I'm just a
Okay.
musician. So. um, my but my theory is, famously, Barbara Streisand had terrible stage fright,
Mm.
And then also, I think just as famously, many people who perform, I'm going to name names, like Bruce Springsteen, Billy Joel, for example, they felt very excited to get on stage. They're very they and my theory is that at the bottom of it, they were likely feeling very similar, if not the same things, but just their interpretation of what they were feeling based on experience, based on their life, whatever, was far different. Is that a fair theory?
Yeah, actually, I think you're onto something there, Mike, and we'll have to, create a laboratory where we can test all this one day. But I think
Right.
that when it comes down to it, biologically, what's happening when we are anxious or nervous or have stage fright or whatever we want to call it, what's happening biologically is we're going into fight, flight, or freeze. So our sympathetic nervous system, which is the part of the nervous system, the part of the autonomic nervous system responsible for that fight, flight, or freeze response, is getting us ready because something big is about to happen. Now, speaking back to thousands of years ago, this would have prepared us to fight a wild animal or a warring tribe or whatever it might have been within our evolution. And, animals obviously have this too. Now, I always make the joke that when we're in fight or flight, our body is preparing to either fight the lion or run from the lion. But as performers, we have to walk on stage and stand next to the lion essentially and perform.
Hmm.
So I think that you're probably onto something saying that, the response in the body is very much the same because biologically we're all very, very similar in that way. But your interpretation, and this is where the mental aspect, the cognitive aspect comes in, your interpretation of those feelings is going to make a very big difference. It's going to be, oh, I feel this nervous excitement. I can't wait to get on stage. I'm so excited to sing to my audience. They are really excited to be here. Maybe that type of self-talk versus, oh, I feel terrible. That must mean something is wrong. This is going to be a disaster, and they're all going to shout boo at me. Right. So this just depends on how my brain decides to speak about my physical and emotional experience and how it decides to interpret it, sort of the lens through which we view our own experience. And I think for many people can really go up and down. Maybe I know I've had some very bad performing experiences in my life, very traumatic performing experiences. I think most of us have. And you could be soaring along and everything could be going well. And all it takes is maybe one bad concert or one mishap somewhere. I don't know. Let's say you, as a singer, for example, a common one for singers would be, I'm doing the same opera that I've done 100 times, and suddenly in the middle of it, I forget the words and I have no idea what's going on. Right? Maybe my brain just
Right.
took a little vacation for that moment. Well, that experience, you could just have that happen once within a decades long career. And it could be enough to really, really knock down your confidence. So when I work with people on things like this, we definitely work very heavily on what is our self-talk doing? What are our thoughts doing? What is the lens through which we are viewing all of these experiences? And can we find a more kind, a more supportive, a more positive lens through which to view things? We don't have to completely disregard the reality that sometimes things go wrong or that we may not always like what I just sang at that concert or how I sang it, and that's okay too. But can we sort of disarm the way we're talking to ourselves about ourselves and about our experiences?
Is that a way of saying, or is there a way that I know it's impossible, but maybe somewhat that you can disassociate yourself from your performance or disassociate even yourself from your art in a sense, in the sense of saying like, this, and it's as an artist it's very difficult, but can you or can one say this is my art, this is a reflection, but it is not me as a person? Is that a
Yeah.
possibility?
Yeah, I think that's a possibility, and I think that that's a really healthy balance to work towards. I think it's as both of you, I'm sure, know, and I know this myself, is that when you have this, once again, I hate the T word, but this quote unquote talent, then you people see you this way and people refer to you this way. Oh, so and so is a musician. And they oftentimes, I've been a therapist for years now, and still people that I've known for a long time will introduce me as an opera singer
Mm,
rather than a therapist, right? So there's
right.
this sort of vested interest that they have also in me being a certain way, and whether it's family members or friends or colleagues, what have you. And of course, to be a successful artist and to make a living at it, you do have to have, I believe, a very high amount of dedication and devotion to the craft and the practice, a lot of discipline. You make a lot of sacrifices. Like once again, I said, if I wasn't a singer, I would be having a break right now. But I, was rehearsing before I got on this call with the two of you, and I have a rehearsal this afternoon. So, this isn't a day off, but I'm happy to make that sacrifice because I value showing up as a singer in this world and presenting my craft. But I think that unfortunately, because we oftentimes receive a lot of attention for once again being talented or having this gift or having this thing that we do out there in the world, some of us do maybe not spend as much time as we could growing and developing the other parts of our lives. So making sure that we have a lot of baskets from which to draw our self-esteem, because if we're only drawing our self-esteem from the musician basket, that's a very precarious balance to maintain. So yes, to your question, I do
Wow.
think it's possible. And I think not only is it possible, but it's necessary. And I think that you bring more to your art. Of course, I'm no longer
See,
a full-time. Oh, go
that's an
ahead.
interesting point. I was gonna say that it's an
Yeah,
interesting point that by doing that, it actually brings more to the art.
I believe it does. I mean, I think the richness of my experience now having this sort of other career that I do, means that when I go to do my singing, it's very purposeful. I've made a space for it in my life. I'm more choosy about what types of gigs I say yes to. Um, I I have a new richness of experience to bring to it. Um, yeah, I think that it's too bad that we have this once again very binary view that either you're a musician or you're doing something else. But many musicians, as both of you know, we teach, we perform, we write, we maybe have other jobs. Does that make us any less of a musician? In my mind, certainly not.
Hmm. I'm glad you bring some of those up. My fiance is also a pianist, and we listen to pianists, and even though it's not, it's an extension of who we are. It's not actually who we are, like the voice per se. We always say that you can hear someone's life or a little bit of who they are, how they are, through their music making. And for me, that's always been very important. And I've done, like you, I've had my hands in other baskets. I guess I've gone the science route. I did pre-med bio in undergrad, and I do chess. I play chess, and all these different things. Yeah, they take time, and I'm glad you brought that up too. It's not just talent, or as many people say, oh, genius. No, this little kid. Did you see him on YouTube? He's a genius. And I remember watching one of those TED talks. I think it was Ken Robinson on education, and he talks about every kid's a genius. It's they all have talent, they all have possibility, and it's how much you work and how you hone those skills. And musicians, I don't think most people realize just how much time it takes to hone those skills as a musician. But back to your point that all these things that you do really color your music making, and they influence your music making. And I think the greatest artists that I know that I respect, I mean, they've lived such interesting lives. Like Rubinstein, I can think of
Mm.
as a classic example. Such a colorful life, and his playing was so colorful as a result. And I think we need to strive for that and be a little bit more all encompassing. And in today's world, I think it's getting harder and harder. We have more competitions. There's more pressure to be more perfect with social media and with recording and all that, and that creates more anxiety and stage fright in and of itself. So
Yeah.
I think that holistic approach you're talking about is important.
Yeah, when I work with clients, sometimes I surprise them because I say, let's actually zoom out and let's look at how you're doing in all of your life right now. And we talk about lots of different categories, whether career and financial, family, love, relationships, hobbies, fun, friendship, health, the environment in which you live. All of these different things, um, they're so important. And I can just speak for my own experience that when I thought I was giving up my opera career and I moved back to the States, and I honestly didn't know if I would ever sing professionally again because, I had based my career in a whole different continent and with a different set of connections. It was what this means for me now is that if something doesn't go well in my singing life, it's not the end of the world for me because I have other baskets from which to draw my self esteem and my identity. I can show up in the world in different ways that I feel good about. So I can, I think, approach my singing with a little bit of a lighter touch. I don't. It doesn't have to always feel like such life and death when I get up on stage, or when I go to an audition, or when I submit my materials for a certain company or organization.
Mhm.
Yeah,
I have a
that's
little cute thing to bring up as performers, we always get told. I remember even as a kid, my teacher recommended that, setting up all my stuffed animals or something and pretending they're famous people, or the one that, pretend all the members of the audience are naked, and
Yeah.
what do you say to those kinds of things? Are they helpful, or are there other ways to combat that?
Yeah, I mean, I could list 100 different things that I think are helpful, and but I think that there is some actual wisdom into some of the sort of, let's say, maybe folk methods of performance anxiety management that we're all offered. But yeah, imagine the audience in their underwear, or perform for your stuffed animals. I don't think that there's not value there, but I think where we maybe do a disservice in our community is that, once again, we only maybe have the one or two mentors in our lives, and these people are not trained in mental health, and why should they be? That's not their area of expertise. So I think if somebody finds the tips that their music teacher gives them helpful, then that's wonderful. Then probably that person is offering up something that's valuable. But where I like to draw the line is for the many people out there for whom that isn't helpful enough, or it's not helpful all the time, there's nothing wrong with them. That's also a completely normal experience. For some people, imagining the audience in their underwear is not going to be enough to tone down the sympathetic nervous system response. And so, a lot of what I do with people when I work with them is just teach them some very specific breathing methods, teach them some very specific preparation methods, teach them very specific sort of routines and rituals that I have them build into their more everyday lives to show them. And the same goes for actually the therapy clients that I work with who aren't musicians, to show them, to show us that we have more control over our experience than we often know. However, most of the time it's not going to be fixed by something quick. It's going to be fixed by a practice, by a more holistic
mm,
way of living, by attending to our anxiety on a more daily basis, to show ourselves and to empower ourselves to say, oh, when I start noticing that I'm going into my sympathetic nervous system response, here are 10 things that I can do to try to get myself into what's referred to as the parasympathetic nervous system response, which is sometimes referred to as the rest and digest mode, which is, we don't want to fully be in rest and digest when we're performing. I don't even know if such a thing is possible, though, but we don't want to be in such sympathetic response that we are, trembling uncontrollably and barely able to take a breath, which is going to result in a shaky tone as a singer, for example. Um, so if those sort of more folk methods are working for people, then by all means keep using them. I find it interesting whenever I give talks at colleges or high schools. Especially, I did that obviously a lot more prior to the pandemic, but I've done some of it via Zoom in the pandemic as well. The younger population, generally speaking, has less anxiety, but the younger population tends to think, oh, if that hasn't happened to me yet, then it's never going to happen to me.
Mm.
Whereas, I work with plenty very seasoned professionals who have had a crisis maybe middle of their career, or have always coped with a significant amount of performance anxiety, but they've still managed to have a successful career. So I always like to tell people, not trying to be a negative Nancy here, but you don't know when it could arise. So why not already have a toolkit,
right.
already prepared in your pocket so that you can know how to deal with these things when they do come up.
Mhm.
Well, and as you said, I mean, it's you never know when it's going to happen or how. I've, you know, uh, you know, sung in front of thousands and thousands of people and nothing. I sing in front of my family, and all of a sudden I get
Yeah.
choked up.
Yep,
It's like
yep,
it
yep.
is. You never know the setting. You never know quite
Mm-mm.
what's going to trigger those things. And I think it is. I love that you said that it's a practice, because I do think that if you tend to have an um oversensitive anxiety nerve,
Yeah.
I think that um that probably shows up in more than just your performance life.
Mm-hmm.
And so having a practice of I want to ask you a little bit about that. Like, what are like maybe one or two really key practices that people can take away, that they can say, okay, if I do this and this, it may be something that can help me with these issues.
Sure. So I have a couple sort of quick ones. Now, I will add the caveat that all of these need to be practiced even when we're calmer, because if we are only going to try to remember to use one of these strategies when we're like at level 9 on a scale of 1 to 10 of nervousness, we're not going to remember. And that's the whole problem, is that we don't have enough tools that we build into our everyday lives. So then when the time of high nerves comes in, we don't know what to do. And even if we maybe learn something along the way, if it's not something that we've been practicing on a more regular basis, we're not going to remember, because our brain won't allow us to in that highly nervous state. Our brain is very focused on survival, and it's not going to be able to tap into our powers of higher thinking in the prefrontal cortex when we're highly aroused from a nervous system standpoint. But one breath strategy that I really like to teach people, that's a quick and easy one. I think it's one of the simplest ones, very, very effective. But once again, needs to be practiced more often. Like sometimes I do this one if I'm sitting at a stoplight, or feeling slightly agitated about something else. I call it a hissing breath. Sometimes I call it a snake breath. And the goal of this is to just take in a really easy inhale through your nose, and then hiss out your exhale like a snake for as long as is comfortable. So I'll just do 2 of them in a row so you can kind of hear. So I'm going to inhale through my nose and hiss out through my mouth. When I come to the end of that breath, I'm just going to do another quick, easy inhale through my nose and hiss out through my mouth again. Now, the reason that this is powerful and effective is because if we do any type of breathing strategy where our exhale is at least twice as long as our inhale, which in that exercise it definitely is, we automatically stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system response. Once again, that's the rest and digest. So that stimulates the vagus nerve, which is responsible for calming us, and gets us into a more parasympathetic response. Now, once again, caveat, because I have a lot of people that I work with who say, oh, I've tried breathing before and it doesn't work for me, to which I say, that's not a thing. You just haven't either been doing it the right way, or you haven't been doing it long enough. So
right. It's biological, my friend.
Exactly. This is biology. This is just biology. You're not special in this way. Your nervous system works just like mine. And so what we want to do with, for example, the hissing breath is do those breaths maybe 5 to 10 times. Take a little break and assess where we're at. Has my anxiety gone down at all? If we think of our anxiety, and here's another technique that I'm very fond of, is what we call anxiety scaling, where we begin to observe in our everyday lives, what does a 1 on my anxiety scale look like for me? What do I notice? What does a 1 look like? What do I notice physically, emotionally, mentally? What does, let's say, a 5 look like for me? What does an 8, 9, 10 look like for me? And then we can begin, figuring out where our 3 is and where our 7 is. And it's not absolutely imperative that we do all 10 degrees of the scale, but to really get to know ourselves better in this way, because too often what happens is that people are not trained to become aware of where their anxiety is in that current moment, and they don't recognize when it's rising. And then if it gets to be the 7, 8, 9 on the scale, oftentimes by that time we're in a full-fledged panic, and or, God forbid, having a panic attack, which is very uncomfortable for people. And by then it might be I don't want to say too late, but it's going to be much, much more difficult to get our anxiety back down to the level of 3 or 4. So what we want to do is we want to begin noticing in our everyday lives, where's my 1, where's my 3, where's my 5, what do I notice in myself? And we just want to become sort of our own little rats in our own little laboratory, our own scientist, our own rat, our own laboratory, looking at ourselves and just examining without judgment, where am I at? What does that look like for me? So that we can then begin recognizing when we're at our 5 or 6, and then we can employ something like a breathing exercise. So, if you did a couple rounds of this hissing breath, for example, hopefully what you would notice is that you had taken your 7 to a 5 to maybe a 4, and that would give you a feeling of control over your anxiety. Another great thing that I like to have people practice is building some type of guided meditation or breathing or spiritual practice into their everyday lives, maybe even into every practice session. For example, coming into the room where I practice and sitting for a moment and doing some breath exercises, and or sitting down, popping in my headphones and doing some type of guided meditation that we can find out there on apps or YouTube or wherever. Or for some people it might be journaling, or it might be a brief moment of prayer or whatnot, but having some type of practice to come back down into ourselves, to find a little bit more quiet in our physical and emotional and mental experience, and then to go into practicing our craft. And I think if we're doing this on a more regular basis every day, really all this is taking is maybe 2 to 5 minutes, 10 minutes maximum. We're then going to recognize its effects long term. And then hopefully the day of a performance or the day of a bigger rehearsal, we're going to then heavily lean on that practice and maybe extend it a little bit, so that we're entering, for example, when I'm going to my rehearsal this afternoon, I'm entering at a calmer spot than I would have had I not been paying attention to these things.
Right.
I was going to make another reference from what you just said to to sports. If we think about warming up in music, of course, we might do exercises or warm ups, and that's just physical. But in sports, if you're training for a very important event, you're doing the physical warm ups, but you're doing the mental and the psychological warm ups too. And I don't think we do enough of that in music, at least in my world. That we're not doing a lot of that preparation. So when we just practice on our own at home, and then all of a sudden something doesn't go right in a performance, and we think, well, it went or in a lesson, and the common adage is, well, it went perfectly at home.
Mhm.
But yeah, did you practice all of those other preparations? Probably not.
Yes, yes, and we're not taught to in our community, and in sports psychology, they also heavily rely on visualization strategies, and these have been proven time and time again with loads and loads of research out there to be incredibly effective. For me to sit down and to visualize my, let's say, aria going really well and really getting into the sort of kinesthetic visualization of it, not just the visual and also the auditory visualization, and sort of immersing myself in the experience of stepping into the future, putting myself in this moment where everything is going just as I want it to. We're strengthening the same neural pathways that we are if we're actually doing the thing. And we're showing the same amounts of brain growth in certain areas. That can be an incredibly powerful exercise to go through. But it's about just building in that little bit of mental and emotional warm up into your physical warm ups that you do, because I think sometimes we can get a little bit robotic. I mean, I know sometimes I just rush into my practice room and I slam open the piano and I plunk some notes and I start singing scales because, oh, I've got to get somewhere and I've got to warm up my voice real quick because I've got to get to rehearsal in an hour. And I'm not really taking that 5 minutes to get myself into a more focused, calm state of mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had a teacher once, a fairly big name and wonderful inspiration. But I remember he to not to play devil's advocate on this issue, but he would say you can't just go to a concert. You've got to practice. You're not quite prepared, and look to the heavens and be inspired, and God will somehow help you and create a miracle. But by the same token, this visualization of being in the concert and doing all the right things has to be part of the preparation. So aside from just the physical practicing, you really have to imagine. And I tell my students, look at the score. Don't get away from the piano and just imagine how it's sounding, what the tone is that you're creating, how physically you're even doing these things, because that starts to lengthen or support that myelin of what we're doing, and there's a lot of motor skills that are being developed even if we're just thinking about it. So
Yes,
um,
definitely. In fact, they've done very interesting research on piano specifically to take people who don't play the piano at all, and half of experiment will actually practice on a real keyboard, and the other half will just do visualization of learning a piano. And they show very similar amounts of growth in certain parts of the brain in both groups at the end of those experiments. It's really
Hmm.
fascinating.
You mentioned before, I think we got on, that you went to McGill, and I actually did work I lived in Montreal for 11 years.
Oh, very
And
cool.
we're doing another podcast with a friend of mine from New Mexico later today, who is a PhD candidate at McGill.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow. That's so
yeah,
fascinating. Yeah.
yeah.
But
But I did. I'm sure you know Brahms, the Brahms project
mhm.
out there, and so I did a number of tests, and I have a brain scan actually from one of those that you're mentioning, where it was very very similar. We played on a dummy keyboard with in an MRI, and then we had to just visualize or hear a melody, and it was testing our memory, our motor skills, some
Mm.
correlation there. And yeah, it was pretty fascinating to see a direct correlation between even visualizing or doing some of the muscle memory, the motions, and um, how much better your memory was, and how much more solid it was, and how much more confident you would be as a result.
That's so cool. How that's so neat that you got to be a part of an experiment like that. I would love to
Yeah.
be involved with something like that someday, because it's really just it's about, once again, these are just body parts and cells, and we all have them. And there's, I think we do ourselves a disservice when we have this kind of smoke and mirrors thing going on in the music world of, well, some people are just born more special
Uh-huh.
than others. And
Yeah.
um like I said, maybe we're born with a little bit of aptitude for something, but the rest of it has to be honed with a lot of focused practice, and not just sitting down and practicing. I think too often the answer for somebody's nervousness, I've heard this from actual, music professors before. Oh, well, you're just nervous because you haven't practiced enough. And sure, that might be true some of the time, but that is certainly not true all of the time. And, somebody could practice obsessively and just become more and more anxious as they do it.
Hmm. Sure.
I want to bring up one more aspect to this, and that's in the moment of crisis. And I think about this, and there's the time, and it's imagine that we're on stage and we're performing, and things go horribly wrong, and I think it's important for us to imagine that, and it's important to imagine that beforehand and come up with some strategies, for that
Sure.
inevitability. So let's talk about like how can we maybe prime the pump a little bit for having some strategies for when our mind goes completely blank, or we're completely lost,
Crash
or
and burn.
just anxiety
Mm,
takes over at the moment.
yeah. Well, I think, once again, underlining the importance of having some type of pre performance ritual so that hopefully we're not in such a state of agitation. But of course, this being real life, um, I, I like to encourage that people, I don't think that, I think you could also effectively use visualization in a scenario like this, that you visualize yourself recovering. Now, I wouldn't want anybody to have this be the sole visualization practice that they do. I would also want them to spend plenty of time visualizing, doing everything very successfully and very well. But let's be real. If you did crash and burn, if something happened, what would likely need to occur is you would need to, take a moment, take a few deep breaths, reground yourself, maybe feel your feet on the floor or feel your behind sitting in the chair, laugh, go, okay,
Right.
this is real life and this is not life or death. It feels very life or death in this moment, but, be able to sort of mentally talk yourself down and say, it's okay. And, once again, taking some deep breaths, getting ourselves back into the experience, the experience of the body, tapping into, how do I feel? What do I notice? You could do something like a brief, very brief, what we call five senses meditation, where you, um, whether out loud or under your breath or just in your head, you name five things that you see in that moment. You name four things that you hear. You name three things that you feel. You name two things that you smell, one thing that you taste. Or maybe you just begin sort of mentally listing things. I see a person smiling at me. I see this color on the wall, to bring ourselves back into the present moment. Because if we have really crashed and burned and we're feeling just so incredibly anxious, we are in such a high state of agitation that, like I mentioned before, our limbic system, which is the sort of fear center and emotion center of the brain, is all lit up. And our prefrontal cortex, which is our higher levels of thinking, is not completely offline, but very more offline. So if we need to get ourselves out of this pickle, like let's say remember the words or communicate with the rest of the musicians on stage where we want to restart or whatever it may be, we're likely going to have to get out of that intense fight or flight state, bring ourselves back down to earth a little bit, and then restart.
Very good. Yeah. And it's interesting, like for me, um, uh, when things happen, because your heightened sense are so aware of everything. Everything feels like it's happening and it's taking 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Like it seems so
slow
long.
motion. Yeah.
Right. And then I go back and I'll listen to a recording where I have crashed and burned, and I'll be like, oh, that was like literally, a half a second.
Yeah. Totally.
But everything just happens so quickly.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for people to remember that. Like, it's okay to take a breath. It's okay to reset. It's okay to have a strategy. I remember I had a student who struggled, and he always felt like he was going to forget. And I said, you know what? If you end up forgetting your entire piece at the recital, just, slam your hands on the keyboard, stand up, take a big, huge bow, and everyone will laugh and it'll be great. And that is in fact what he did. And it was fine.
Yeah.
It turned out fine. But
right. But it's sort of what you're talking about is the ability to also calm yourself and comfort yourself through your self-talk and say, likely nobody has noticed this as much as I have. I've been through this before and gotten through it. And then also being able to sort of de-escalate yourself after the fact, right? After you come off stage, and most people want to cry and, tear their hair out and go, oh, that was so terrible. It's like, no, it's okay. Probably very few people actually noticed. And de-escalating the whole scenario after the fact as well.
Right.
I had another question too, and I know Mike also has a lot more. The different, people say they're extroverted or they're introverted, or maybe a mixture. But you tend to, I hear a lot of friends that I can't really perform, or I'm not really going to put myself out there. I'm just an introverted person, and that kind of precludes anything. It just stops it right there. So what do you say to that? For me, it's more of a spectrum. But still, how do you talk to clients or convince them that it's of that issue? Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting because I actually consider myself to be an introvert, and people who know me well know that. But if somebody sees me in my performing life or at a party or something, they would never guess. So I don't think that being an introvert or extrovert actually has much to do with it at all, because I know a lot of introverts who are performers. In fact, I think many times you benefit from being an introvert because the classic description of an introvert is you recharge your batteries by being alone. And what are we doing when we're practicing our music? Frequently, we are there alone for many hours at a time, right? And so, yes, I agree with you, Elias, that it exists on a spectrum. But I think if people are saying, if this was a client of mine, or when I was still teaching voice, a student of mine who said this to me, what I would probably say to them is, I don't know if I fully agree with that, because I can think of a lot of examples to the contrary. And I myself am an introvert. I would guess that it has more to do with self-esteem and with belief in your abilities and skills. And look, not everybody has to be a performer. If some people are happy just playing for themselves at home, more power to you, go for it. That's fine, right? Not everybody has to be a performer. But I would guess that a lot of these people, when people would come to me for singing lessons, and I would have things like recitals, and then, half of my studio would say, oh, I don't want to participate in a recital. I would say, but hold on, you're here because your dream is eventually to sing for other people. I think very few of you are here because you just only want to sing for yourself better in the shower. There is that dream underneath it all that I think a lot of people have, of being able to get up and perform. And where I think they get mistaken is they think that in order to get up and perform, you have to feel confident and not afraid. But I would venture to say that I don't have to feel confident and unafraid the whole time. I can feel worried. I can feel insecure. I can feel afraid. That doesn't stop me, though, from getting up and doing the thing. I'm always afraid when I get up to perform. Am I also most of the time excited? Yes. was kind of a combination of some terror and some excitement, and hoping things go well and worrying about the things that might go wrong. And you don't have to be 100% confident or unafraid in order to perform. In fact, most of us, I would say, are getting up there, and we're definitely a mixture of all of it.
Mhm.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think in a performance, and I tell my students this, and I'm always surprised when I record. I often record myself so I can hear what it sounded like, because I know in the moment, with my heart racing and my senses heightened, I don't really have a realistic
Yes.
judgment of how it sounds to everybody else. But like Mike said too, when you make a mistake, you think it's forever, and it's often just a second or 2 seconds. Um, but there are certain things that I can do in a performance that I can never do in practice,
Yeah.
just because you have that blood rushing. And I think that's a positive thing to tell students too, that hey, you can achieve a lot more than you think. So just channeling that energy, and looking at the positive side instead of the negatives of what you can't do when you're performing.
Yeah, and knowing too that, even very seasoned performers, I always have to laugh after concerts because, people say, "Oh, well, you just look so comfortable up there and it looks so natural." And sometimes they say this at the performances where I was the most nervous for something. And I think, well, haha, fooled you.
Yeah.
That's just called
Right.
acting. That's all
Right.
it is. But, our internal experience, so often we feel like it's projected for the world to see, but most of us are pretty sophisticated at hiding it. So it's
Mhm.
not as apparent to others as we oftentimes assume that it is. But I think many times people have to learn that one by doing it.
Mhm.
Ah. Well, we're speaking with Ingela Onstad. She is a performance anxiety coach. Her website is courageousartistry.com. And I don't want to truncate anything, but I really only wanted to finish up with asking, because a lot of our listeners aren't musicians per se. They love music, or they love a lot of the content I put out. But we're coming up on another set of anxieties of 2021, and setting goals and all those sorts of things. How can some of these techniques, or how do they directly apply? I mean, I think they do, but how would you say they directly apply to the civilians out there?
Yeah, it's funny because in my coaching work, I actually I do have some clients who aren't performers, but some of my materials have spoken to them, and they've contacted me saying, I think that you could be helpful to me in this way, even though I'm not a performer. Do you work with non-performers? And I actually do. And it's all very similar, right? None of these techniques that I teach or talk about are music specific. They are human specific. So no matter who we are, we all have goals and dreams and challenges in our lives. And we have sometimes, difficulties with our self esteem, or how we talk to ourselves, how we think about ourselves, risks that we're willing to take or not willing to take. But I think in terms of goal setting, and it's funny that you mentioned this because I'm doing a free webinar on January 3rd about goal setting for the New Year's for performers, but
Fabulous.
anybody's welcome to join. So I've still got a few spots left in that. So if anybody hears this and is interested, just go to my website and there's a tab for a free webinar and you can just register there. But when it comes to goal setting, I think sometimes we, sort of like we're not really taught much about our mental and emotional health growing up. We're also not really taught much about how to set goals effectively. And I think we set these kind of quote unquote New Year's resolutions, and then we fail at them, and then we go off to heck with New Year's resolutions. They never work anyways. But most of the time it's because we haven't maybe been making things specific enough, or we haven't been breaking them down into smaller chunks, or we haven't been taught about habit formation. But let's say somebody has a goal of I'll take one that a lot of my clients are working on right now, becoming more present on social media in the new year. Because in lieu of, a lot of live performing, they know that they can put more material out there, for example, on their social media. Well, if a person's not doing that, and then they tell themselves, come January 1st, I'm going to start posting, one song a day on social media, I think very few people are going to actually be able to make that happen. And then
Right.
what happens? Maybe they do it once or twice, or they don't do it at all. And then they blame themselves and judge themselves. They tell themselves, oh, I just don't have the willpower. I'm just weak, or I'm not motivated. And, you know, what they haven't done is they haven't created any type of system or realistic scaling of any type of process. So, for example, with this goal of becoming more present on social media, which, insert your goal here, whether they're health related or fitness related or career related, I would help that client break things down into much, much smaller steps. So maybe their step this week would just be create that, Instagram profile if they don't have one yet, or create a private one that they're not putting out into the world yet. And then maybe the week after that, they would just begin practicing some songs while recording themselves, but not putting it anywhere yet, just recording themselves, with their camera, their phone, their laptop, so that they're getting used to having the camera in the room. Maybe after that, they record one thing and they share it with one person who gives them some feedback, but really working to figure out what is, if I have this one goal and I want to reverse engineer it, what is baby step number one?
Mm-hmm.
And then not overwhelming ourselves with 50 baby steps at one time, but just baby step number one on one day or 1 week, and then moving into the next step in the next week, so that it all feels actionable and doable. And then we can pat ourselves on the back every week and say, oh, look, I took one more little step towards my goal. So, in the typical kind of New Year's related fitness goals, don't say you're going to run every morning if you've never done that before. Maybe you lay out your clothes for week 1, or you make sure you have all your clothes washed and in order. Maybe week 2, you put on your sneakers and you walk around the block every day, and that's all you do.
Right.
Right. So just keeping things very manageable and realistic, and also celebrating the small steps that we take. Oftentimes I think we think, well, we get very all or nothing about it. Like if I didn't run 2 miles, then,
I
failed. And then, I'm terrible at New Year's resolutions.
Right. Oh, I think
easy
that's
to go
a
down that
powerful
rabbit
thing.
hole.
Yeah.
Oh, that, and I think that's powerful because, and I'll equate it back to music here real quick, because I think, for example, because we are emotional creatures, we're full of all these different little emotions. We tend to equate so much to ourselves. The piano doesn't know, that it's out of tune. The piano doesn't know that it doesn't think it messed up, and so it doesn't say, I'm a terrible piano, I'm no longer a piano.
Right. I'm not worthy of being a piano.
Right.
Yeah.
But we do that all the time.
Yes.
We make a mistake, or we don't follow through on a goal. Oh, I'm terrible. I'm never going to get in shape,
Yeah. We call this process, actually, in psychology, we call it just very simply labeling, right? So if I say, well, I'm stupid and unmotivated, I've just put that label on myself. There's no way to prove that that's true or not true. Perhaps with the right help and support, I'd be able to be very motivated and achieve a lot of things. But, we get very black and white about it, and we label ourselves, and then we suffer under these labels. And I think all of us could probably accomplish a lot more in our lives if we just had a system. And also what we need to do is realize that in achieving, let's say, some of our biggest performance goals, if we wait too often, like I mentioned before, I think we wait to feel 100% confident, or to not feel any fear at all. And many times, in order to accomplish our biggest goals, I firmly believe we're going to have to accept that fear is in the driver's seat, or in the passenger seat, or in the back seat. That fear is going to be part of this, and there's nothing wrong with that. I can still act while afraid. I can
Right.
still, for example, post to my social media profile my newest song, even though I'm afraid. That the fear doesn't have to stop me. And that actually, if we do it more often while feeling afraid, we'll show ourselves, I didn't die from doing that. The world didn't explode.
Right.
Maybe next time I do it, I feel slightly less fear. And then it just becomes more of a habit. And hopefully at some point we've taken a lot of the fear from the process.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I think
Elias,
you're a great. Yeah, I think all of your talk. It's such an embodiment of the reasons. I mean, I always want to bring it back to the value of music and all the aspects that are involved with it, including performance anxiety. And we just don't see the value of this often in real life. But there are real life applications of this, and this affects us all, not just musicians, not just performers. So I think what you're talking about is very important, and everybody can relate and see and just see the value in studying what we're studying and doing what we're doing. So I really thank you for being sort of an avatar of that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I feel very passionately about this. And I feel, other than my sort of calling that I feel to sing and be a musician, this is my other main life's work, is to help people understand that that they're so much greater and bigger than they're able to imagine, and that they can take risks, and that they can learn how to do things that they once thought were impossible. And it's not magic. It's just finding a process. It's learning how to speak to yourself differently. It's learning some coping skills and strategies. It's having, supportive people around you. It really, it doesn't take much. It's not that you're born with it or you're not born with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
That's
wonderful.
awesome. It really is. Well, we're again speaking with Ingela Onstad. Her website is courageousartistry.com. You can also find her on Facebook at Courageous Artistry, and on Instagram. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Fabulous. I really appreciate you being on the show. I think we've gotten a lot of great wisdom. I hope you'll come on again.
I'd love to.
That'd be fabulous. All right. Well, thank you. And this is And If Love Remains.